Good morning. Just caught me doing a little light reading. Uh, so stupid. All right. Anyway, nice to see you all this morning. I'm actually doing this from the cozy confines of my home instead of school this Tuesday morning. Couple dreary days on Sunday and Monday, but looks okay this morning. So hopefully we'll have a good one. Have a chance to get outside for some of you. Anyway, on to the agenda stuff here. The War of 1812 quizzes, for those of you who finished it, I did grade those. Those were assigned on Friday. Most of you got it done on Friday. Some of you didn't get it done until yesterday, which is fine. Same thing as before. You highlighted your answers, and I went through and highlighted the correct ones if I needed to. Couple of things there. One, yes, the Capitol building, and then it wasn't called the White House, but the president's mansion were burned by the British. So that's kind of like a pretty strong power move, right? When you go into another person's capital and burn the head of the executive branch and the seat of the legislative branch. So that shows you that the British were far more effective during the second phase because they were no longer fighting Napoleon, no longer fighting the French over in Europe. Also, in the second phase, we get Francis Scott Key singing, well, maybe he sang it too, but composing the Star Spangled Banner outside Fort McHenry in Baltimore. However, the British did end up sort of the War of 1812 is maybe a tie, but towards the end, the Americans did have the upper hand with the Battle of New Orleans. Of course, one of the things you may have noticed with the Battle of New Orleans is that it didn't actually have to take place. So the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, was signed on December 24th, 1814. But the Battle of New Orleans took place in January of 1815. So that's actually the second time that slow mail affected the War of 1812. Because if you remember, the British had sent word to the Americans that they would no longer interfere with American shipping. But that wasn't received by Congress in time. So had there been a telegraph or a telephone back in the War of 1812, then all of this could have been avoided. But obviously that was not the case. What else? The president at the time was James Madison. Some of you insist on putting George Washington for things. That's sort of like we joke about some of you always love to answer the Declaration of Independence, no matter what the correct answer is. I feel like some of you are falling down that trap with George Washington. It's like, oh, it's a name I remember. Take the time, go through your reading, go through your notes. I feel like if I asked you who first walked on the moon, some of you would also say George Washington. He died in the 1790s, so that would make his presidency in the War of 1812 pretty difficult. What else? One of the things that was mentioned in the reading is, did the War of 1812 accomplish all that much? Because it was, as far as wars go, a virtual tie. What really changed? Well, typically with war, people talk about, what land was gained. Well, no land was gained in the War of 1812. Let me repeat that once again. No land was gained in the War of 1812. So that was, I think, the answer to number 10 maybe on the quiz. However, can you say that nothing was accomplished? Native American resistance was weakened. It increased patriotism, made a national hero out of Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson, that's the guy on our $20 bill. He became a very powerful president, seventh president a little bit later down the line. And then what was the other thing? Oh, increase of American manufacturing, because we couldn't depend upon the British for manufactured goods because we were fighting against them. So that led to an uptick in factories in the United States. So if you see a question like that on a summative down the line, did the War of 1812 accomplish very much? Well, it really depends. There was no clear winner, no land exchange hands. However, when you look at those other things that I mentioned that are lesson number 5, then you could answer in the affirmative. So those are some of the big things there. Capitol building being burned, I mentioned. Some people believe that the fires in Washington could have been a lot worse had not a torrential kind of summer downpour in August taken place. But some of you answered Buckingham Palace, which I thought was interesting because Buckingham Palace is in London. So why would the British burn their own? Anyway, we'll skip over that one. Today, lesson 6, as we start talking about America's interactions with Mexico, both during the Texas Revolution and then the Mexican-American War, I think it's good to focus on perspective a little bit, which is, how one's unique viewing, the point of view when you look at things, because that's really important in history. Even though you guys are all roughly the same age and you are all live roughly in the same part of the country, or you live in the same part of the country, everyone brings their own different perspective when talking about history. And I think that's important when you look at, just to acknowledge that sometimes what you see in history books or what you hear on the news or read on newspapers or read online, that you bring your own different perspective, and newspaper reporters, and they bring their own different perspective, and people talking on TV, they have their own different perspective. Not just how old you are, where you live, but your financial status, your how old you are, your religion, your race, all those things can factor into your perspective when understanding history. So just to understand that a little bit. So with lesson 6 today, you'll see it on Google Slides, and it doesn't really dive into Mexico yet, but it talks about, gives you some interesting images, and forces you to try to not just think about your own perspective when looking at historical pictures, but to also try to figure out what other people's perspectives may have been, right? Develop a little empathy, or at least attempt to do so when examining some different images. So that will be today's work and Wednesday's work. I'm not going to make that due until Thursday. There's a little bit of writing involved. I think you could probably get it done in a day. But I still have to take a look at the images that you did about the War of 1812 that were due on Monday. So I'm really trying not to give you too much work if I'm behind on giving grades and giving feedback, because I could give you 1,000 assignments a day, but if I don't look at all of them, that's not really fair to you. So make sure you take a look at graded work. If you have any questions, comments. Oh, last thing I mentioned, it's not on the agenda, but the myths have all been graded, and I put the comments right in PowerSchool. So if you have any questions about those, let me know. Obviously, if you're missing sections, citations, some of you, maybe the directions escaped you a little bit, but hopefully you have some time to revisit those. All right, everybody. Hopefully it'll be a nicer day than it has been in the past, and I hope you're all doing well. I will check in with you later.